Chapter 13. I stare at Merrily in confusion, as if she just told me one of those impossible-sounding brain teasers. Like if a plane crashes on the border of Mexico and the United States, where are all the survivors buried? Answer: nowhere. The survivors are still alive. How could Elizabeth and I be sisters if both of us are only children? Oh. Only one survivor, I muttered, which probably makes Merrily think I've lost my mind. You mean Elizabeth died before I was born? Yes, Merrily says, and for a minute I think that's all she's going to tell me. But then she gestures toward the kitchen table and says, "Sit down." We sit in opposing chairs, and although Merrily doesn't begin her story, once upon a time, I feel like I'm hearing a tale about a long ago time that's not quite real. Hillary and I grew up in this house, Merrily says. Hillary married Walter and I married Tom, and we moved into houses just around the corner from here. And then we each had one daughter. Elizabeth came first, June of 1978. Then Jocelyn, my Joss, was born that August. I try to figure out how long ago 1978 was, but my mind's not capable of math right now. It seems like an eternity ago, another lifetime. It was another lifetime, I think, Elizabeth's lifetime. Merrily smiling, a misty, faraway look in her eye. Elizabeth and Joss were so tight, more like sisters than cousins, the very best of friends. They were always together, and Hillary and I became closer because of them. I pictured two little girls toddling around, falling over one another like puppies at play. I'm not sure what Josh should look like, but I give Elizabeth my blonde hair, my hazel eyes, and then somehow I'm jealous. Elizabeth had my parents, and my hair, and my eyes, and my best friend, almost sister cousin Josh. At that age, I had Gretchen Dunlap across the street telling me I was a spoiled brat. Merrily still smiling. The summer Josh and Elizabeth both turned 6, they fell in love with the Olympics. Do you know who Mary Lou Retton is? The gymnast. She's won 5 medals in '84. She was the star. All Joss and Elizabeth wanted to do was be Mary Lou. You should have seen all the cartwheels they did, the somersaults, off the couches, across the yard, down the stairs. Hillary and I signed them up for gymnastic lessons, mostly because we thought the girls would end up killing themselves otherwise. We figured there would be mats at the gymnastic lessons, mats and spotters and safe techniques. And were there, I ask? I'm bracing myself for the end of this happy story when I know Elizabeth is going to die. Of course, Merrily says. Her fingers fidget with the edge of the placemat in front of her. I know you're going to think I'm just a proud mother, a proud aunt, but Josh and Elizabeth were good at gymnastics, really good. Naturals, people said. Pretty soon we were driving them an hour away a couple times a week because there were better gymnastics teachers in Ridgetown. It changed the way they were raised, them being gymnasts. That makes sense, I say, though I'm wondering, did swimming change anything about how I was raised? You have to understand, Merrily says, we had people telling us they were going to be medal hopes for the '92 Olympics. They went to Olympics? In spite of myself, I'm impressed. Merrily shakes her head. We didn't make it to '92, she says sadly. And at first, I think that's ridiculous. Merrily's in her 50s or 60s now. Obviously, she lived through 1992. Then I realize she means Elizabeth. Elizabeth didn't make it to '92. It was Elizabeth's 13th birthday, Merrily says. Her voice has taken on a hypnotic quality, as if she has to tell this story now and I have to listen. June 13, 1991. A beautiful day. We took the girls to Sinclair Mountain to celebrate. Sinclair Mountain, I say numbly. In my head, I'm replaying my mother's voice on the phone. I had this horrible dream about her birthday at Sinclair Mountain. It's a big amusement park west of here, Merrily says, with rides and games and roller coasters. Oh, how those girls loved the roller coasters. It was just the 6 of us who went, the 2 families. Walter and Thomas took the day off work. But we kept joking about how the girls didn't really need us. They just checked in when they ran out of money. It was the first time we let them run around on their own like that. Merrily falls silent. I feel such a growing sense of dread that I prompt her. And? There was an accident when we were driving home. Thomas and Elizabeth were killed. She says the words flat out, without emotion. She blinks as if surprised that she's come to the end of the story so quickly. I'm struggling to figure out what I feel. I was overwhelmed with sadness this afternoon looking at the memorial for Marilee's husband, even though I knew nothing about him. Elizabeth was my sister, my long-lost sister, almost exactly my same age when she died, a promising athlete cut down in her prime. And I feel nothing. It just doesn't seem real. So, I say slowly, my parents were really sad for a long time, I bet. But eventually they had me, and that probably helped, didn't it? Cheer 'em up? I want so badly to turn this story around, to end on a happy note with my birth, not Elizabeth's death. Marilee winces, and I think I've probably been insensitive not saying anything about her husband. I suppose, she says slowly. I only saw Hillary and Walter a few times after that, at the funerals, and then they left town. It was too hard, I think, for them to stay here. You stayed, I said fiercely. Well, Marilee says, I was away a lot at first because Josh was hurt pretty bad in the accident, and she was in the hospital up in Chicago for a long time. I was there at her bedside pretty much around the clock. And then when she got out of the hospital, I didn't think I had any choice but to come back here. I know it's probably hard for you to understand how we could go from being so close to me not even knowing where Hillary and Walter lived, to them not even telling me when you were born. It's just, we were all so shattered by the accident. I think sometimes tragedies bring people together and sometimes they pull them apart. And that's what happened to us. The grief came between us. Didn't Mom and Dad visit Joss in the hospital, I ask, because I want to believe that my parents did something besides just showing up 20 years later to dump their new daughter out of Marilee's doorstep. But Marilee shakes her head. I don't really blame them, she says, as if she's read my mind. I did then, and that made things worse. But I think it was too hard on them to see I still had a daughter when theirs was dead. It was hard on me to see Hillary with Walter when my husband was dead. We've circled back to death again, Marilee's fiddling with a placemat once more. I'm not unhappy now, she says carefully, patting the placemat back into place. I have a good life. Lots of friends, a fulfilling job, a daughter. I miss Tom, but I'm not sad anymore. The whole of my life has been not knowing about Hillary and Walter. I feel like Marilee's trying to tell me something beyond the simple meaning of her words. Did you ever try to find them? I ask. I thought they didn't want to be found. They knew where I was. I've had the same phone number since 1977. I think about all the time my parents and I have moved. When I was 1, when I was 2, when I was 6 and 9 and 11. Were we moving so Marilee couldn't track us down? But then why would Dad drive back here and leave me? Just me with Marilee. There's something else I should tell you, Marilee says hesitantly. Something that might help you understand. That night, when we were coming back from Sinclair Mountain, your mother was driving. She thought the accident was her fault. Was it, I ask? I think about how my mother drives on the rare occasion she gets behind the wheel of our car, hunched over with a pinched look on her face. Now that I think about it, I don't believe she's driven even once since school was out last June. June. Was it her fault, I ask again? Marilee gestures helplessly. Nobody knows, she says. Nobody will ever know. 14. It's nearly 5 in the morning when I crawl back into my bed, feeling like a totally different person than when I left it. Sleep as late as you want, Marilee says from the doorway. I won't wake you. She turns out the light and shuts the door. But I don't fall asleep. I'm replaying every word she said, recasting everything I thought I knew. Every single one of my memories seems different now. I've spent my entire life with a ghost haunting my family, and I didn't even know it. Or did I? I'm the bestest girl ever, aren't I? I remember asking my mother one afternoon when I was 4 or 5, when I finished what I thought was a particularly beautiful finger painting. Of course, Mom said. But the next time I looked up from my finger paint, she was gone. I tiptoed around the corner and found her sprawled across her bed, sobbing into her pillow. Are you okay, Mummy? I asked. Oh, yes, she sniffled. I've just got something in my eye. Or maybe that wasn't the excuse she used. Maybe it was, my allergies are acting up again, or this cold makes my eyes water, or this always happens when I'm chopping onions. She used all sorts of different explanations over the years. But I think that must have been the first time I didn't believe her. I remember standing there watching her pretend she wasn't crying, and inside me a little voice was whispering, "You're not the bestest." I accidentally left a little smudge of black finger paint on the wall that afternoon, and as long as we lived in that house, looking at that smudge could make me feel bad. Any time I sat at the kitchen table after that, I had to keep my back to the smudge, even then I knew it was there. And now I understand. I couldn't be Mom's bestest girl ever, because Elizabeth had been that first, I think. I remember another time when my father caught me riding my bicycle without a helmet. My parents did everything but provide airbags when I used a trike or bike or scooter. I had knee pads and elbow pads and wrist guards and even special gloves that gave me extra grip. One of the neighbors' dads used to think it was funny to ask if my parents were suiting me up for the NFL. Maybe that's why I decided to break the rules that particular day. Maybe I just liked to feel the wind streaming through my hair, free and unencumbered. When my father found me, he yanked me off the bike, his hands shaking, his voice trembling as he yelled, "Don't you know you could be killed?" And I laughed. "No, Daddy, kids don't die, just old people." He jerked back like I slapped him. "Oh, honey," he said, his voice so full of ache, and that even as a self-centered, insensitive, spoiled little kid, I felt sorry for him. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders and gave him a big kiss on the cheek, and I promised that I would never, ever forget my helmet again. Why didn't he tell me about Elizabeth then? Why didn't he tell me this summer when Mom started crying all the time? Why didn't he tell me before we came to Sanderfield? I want to believe that I now have all the puzzle pieces turned right side up, that figuring out my parents is just a matter of slipping the pieces into place. I can see Elizabeth's face taking form. Hazily, I can't bear to think of her looking too much like me. I can see why my mom would start crying on the anniversary of Elizabeth's birth and death, and why she would have trouble shaking her sorrow as I edged toward 13, the age Elizabeth was when she died. I'm a little creeped out about my birthday right now myself. But why drive from Pennsylvania to Illinois? Why leave me with Merrill? Why cancel her cell phone service? Why erase us from public information? I remember an essay a kid in my English class wrote that got a lot of attention. The title was something like "Teenagers Get a Bad Rap," and his whole point was that society is wrong to blame kids for becoming mouthy and irresponsible and impulsive and rebellious during their teen years. He argued that the true problem is parents go psycho worrying about their kids. They force us to act the way we do, and self-defense was one of his lines. My parents have always been psycho, I whisper into the darkness, because of Elizabeth, and because... But I can't finish my sentence because there's still too much I don't know. How much does Marilee know? Chapter 15. It's nearly noon when I stumble down the stairs and into the kitchen the next morning. I'm still rubbing sleep from my eyes, trying to make them focus. My glasses bounce up and down, making my vision sharp and blurry, sharp and blurry. I slide into a chair across from Marilee, who's sipping coffee and reading a new Sanderfield Reporter. "Did Dad call again? Did I miss it?" I ask. Marilee puts down the paper. "He hasn't called," she says. "How'd you sleep?" "Okay, I guess," I say, because it's simpler than explaining that I feel like I had nightmares all night long, though I can't remember any of them now. I notice she's still wearing her red bathrobe. "Did you take off work again?" "It's Saturday," Marilee says. "Oh, I feel stupid. I was able to keep track of the days back home, but I did more than change time zones when I came to Sanderfield. I slipped into an alternate universe. How was I to know that the days of the week stayed the same?" I've been thinking, Marilee says, leaning across the table. Now that you know about Elizabeth, I think you should meet Joss. Joss? Your daughter? I don't know why I say that like a question. Every word Marilee spoke to me last night is firmly ingrained in my memory. I could just as easily recite, like a reference robot, Josh Wilker, born August 1978 to Marilee and Thomas Wilker, child gymnast and best friend of her cousin Elizabeth, survived June 1991, accident that killed Elizabeth and Josh's father, hospitalized for a long time afterward. Suddenly, I realized I don't know much about Joss since 1991, except that she's the one who recommended that Marilee buy her hybrid gas-electric car, and she isn't married. Yes, Joss, my daughter, Marilee says. She lives over in St. Louis, so she doesn't get back to visit too soon. But you are cousins, you should know one another. Marilee has such a hopeful look on her face, I can't tell her I don't feel like meeting anyone. All right, I say. I'm having a hard time remembering that Joss is grown up now, as old as Tammy at the Y, with her little girl in her pregnant belly. Someone else to be amazed by how much I look like Elizabeth, I think. I don't like looking like Elizabeth. I wish she'd had dark hair and dark eyes and had taken after some entirely opposite branch of the family. What does Joss do? I asked, trying to distract myself. I have a feeling she never made it to the '92 Olympics either. Or Marilee would have said so. Maybe I would even heard of her, but I'm still picturing her as a tiny gymnast in a leotard. Oh, she's a minister, Marilee says. She'll have to preach tomorrow morning, so she can't come today, but she usually has Mondays off, so she could probably come tomorrow afternoon and spend the night. I'll give her a call a little later. I'm trying to mentally replace the gymnast leotard with a liturgical robe. It is not working very well. I glance down at the newspaper on the table to distract myself. Today's Sanderfield Reporter has yet another article about the Chicago embezzler and something else about the president. It's weird that the newspaper is still reporting the same news when my whole world changed overnight. Now, would you prefer breakfast or lunch, Marilee asks. Since it's 11:52, I think you have your choice. Breakfast, I say. I can get it. I walk to the cupboard where I saw Marilee put the Raisin Bran the day before. Now it's got company, a yellow box of corn pops and a red box of Fruit Loops. I grab the Fruit Loops and carry it over to Marilee at arm's length, as if it's evidence in a criminal case. How did you know? I ask. How did you know I'd like Fruit Loops? Marilee looks troubled, probably because I'm practically shouting at her. I didn't, she said. It was just a guess. Elizabeth always loved Fruit Loops, and I don't know, you just remind me so much of her. It made me feel good to buy Fruit Loops for you. I figured if you didn't like them, I could always donate the box to charity. Elizabeth must not have liked nuts, huh? I say. I tried to remember what else Marilee had seemed to know too easily about me the day before, when she was making her grocery list, and she must have loved blueberry muffins and peaches and cream oatmeal. Right, Marilee says. Yesterday, when I was asking you what you liked and didn't like, I suddenly felt like you were Elizabeth and she'd come back and I was getting a chance to feed her. I'm sorry, this is probably sounding too strange to you. Am I making you uncomfortable? Probably some food preferences are genetic and you inherited some of the same genes as her. Then, too, Hillary would have cooked the same foods for you that she cooked for Elizabeth, and it's not like you like everything the same. Not if you hate peaches and cream oatmeal. Elizabeth loved that. She'd choose it over chocolate. Really? I don't tell Marilee I lied yesterday, but I put the box of Fruit Loops back in the cupboard and eat the corn pops instead. They're too hard and too sweet and too full of puffed air. I eat a whole bowl full and still feel totally empty inside.